All right, we are recording. This is Lucas with Bannock Capital, and I am here today with Eli Vo. And Eli is a multifamily expert, and he is a good friend. So today we're going to be talking about passive investing and sort of an interview style with someone who has been there, done this before. And the purpose of this is to answer questions that some people might be having. Eli, I'm sure you get questions all the time from potential investors, and I do as well. And the same questions keep coming up, and the same trepidation keeps coming through in some of those questions. So it was my goal to create this content and interview someone who's been there, done this, to sort of ease some of that fear or trepidation that they might be having. So Eli, let's just talk about who you are, how you got started in passive investing, and maybe just give us a little bit of background.
Sure, Lucas. Thanks for having me, by the way.
My
Not sure
first
about
guest, right?
yeah. Not sure about the expert, but I've been doing this for a little bit now, and so I do have some good lessons learned. So thanks for having me again.
Yeah.
But yeah, sure thing. So I'm actually in the Air Force full time. I work in the Air Force as an IT project manager, and my wife and I we started investing in single family homes about 4 years ago. And so we got to a few of those, a couple of them, and we stepped back, after a little while, and we said, okay, well, in order to meet our goals, we need like a ton of these things, right?
Right.
Like,
Right.
I think back then it was like 30 or 40 of them, like a ton of them.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, that doesn't make much sense. We need to scale, but we need to scale more efficiently. So we started kind of expanding our network and our education, and come to realize, like most people, that multifamily was like the way to go, right?
Right.
So instead of
Right.
having like 100 loans and 100 roofs and 100 insurance policies, started to have just one under, a few hundred units,
Right.
way more efficient. So, and then actually the way to do that was not to buy, small apartment complexes, but actually large ones. That way you could
Right.
afford a full legal team, on-site property management, the whole shebang.
Mm-hmm.
So, anyways, in order to make that transition for us, about 2 years ago, we started. One of the things that we did was start investing passively, right? And
Right.
so me personally, I thought, well, that's a good way to get into a deal, right? Kind of get in there,
Yep.
meet sponsors, see what kind of documents like they put out, talk to them, ask them questions about the deal and all that. So I did it for that reason, but I also want to learn about like the industry in general. And then
Yeah.
I think the third reason was, to kind of find a way to create more passive income on top of like those other two reasons.
Yeah,
So
that's interesting. So let's start with being in the military. That's, first of all, thank you for your service. We appreciate that.
you're welcome.
And what I think is fascinating, because I know quite a few, maybe not quite a few, but several folks that are serving their country right now, but also investing in real estate. Now, it baffles me how you have time to do both. And simply because your time in the military is not your own. You don't get to make your schedule. So tell me a little bit how that works, and maybe how investing passively fit into that.
Well, it's definitely not easy,
Right.
and not just for anyone who's got any kind of, full-time job. So it's about balance, I mean, if there's even such thing as that, but, anyone that has a full-time job and, has hobbies and family and,
Yeah.
I mean, so it's not easy, but that kind of goes back to the old adage of, either find the time or find an excuse, right?
Yeah.
And so it's not always perfect though, so I try to figure out, on a daily and weekly basis, and monthly also to, say, hey, like what's my schedule looking like? And then how can I fit this into, like what time do I have off? How can I squeeze in,
Right.
call investors? How can I squeeze in time to analyze deals, go to walk properties, or do I need to take a plane and fly down to go,
Yeah.
on the weekend or whatever? But yeah, it's tough. I think passive wise, that's one of the beauties of it, is that aside from vetting the sponsor and the deal and the market, I mean, it's pretty effortless, really, so
Yeah.
just give someone essentially like your money and then kind of wait for like that mailbox money to come in.
Yeah. So you wanted to do your own deals. You wanted to be a sponsor of your own deals. And now that you're successful, it's going to be difficult for you to look back. But looking back, why did you choose to be a passive investor first? You mentioned that it was an easy way to get in, but explain that a little bit more for people who might not understand.
Okay, yeah. So, so for the kind of deals that we do, there's like two sides, right? You got like the general partners and the limited partners, right? So you got GPs and
Right.
LPs. And so that's because like the deal kind of requires two sides itself. It requires a person like a sponsor to go out, hunt down the deals, analyze, put the team together, do all the loans, due diligence and all that, close and operate it. But the
Mhm.
other critical part of the deal is the equity, and that's raising money, And
Yeah.
so um, there's so many moving pieces going around that I kind of figured one of the best ways to learn how to be works and to kind of see what kind of documents that these sponsors are putting out and how like they're communicating, talk to like all their LPs. I wanted to
Right.
join like the inside of a deal, kind of get that track record going, and then that way, if I had any kind of questions, I could say, hey, I can call him or her up
Yeah.
directly and ask, whatever question I had about, hey,
Yeah.
why are we doing like this kind of rehab? Why did you change out like the PM company, or, why are you guys doing X, Y, Z over here? And they're pretty open, right? And
Right.
they'll share everything with you, and or they should, if they don't, I'd probably run, you know?
Right. Yeah, definitely. I
Yeah.
like to say that no one thinks twice about investing in Facebook, and you don't get Mark Zuckerberg's personal email address or phone number. But when you're invested in a syndication or passively like you are, you have that person, you have that sponsor's phone number, you have their email, and you have a very high likelihood that they'll take your call. Because if they don't,
Oh,
that's a
yeah.
big problem.
Oh yeah, for sure. For sure. I mean, like you can call up and say, hey, I want all the bank statements, and I see like the general ledger, and hey, why did this go over here? Why did you guys allocate, $10,000 for roofs when really cost this much money? And I mean, you go through all
Yeah.
the everything, and what's crazy also that shocks me, people will give money to buy stock in like Facebook or Amazon or whatever, but when you invest in a deal like this, like ours, right? They can actually go to the property and walk on the property, meet the PM
Yep.
company, and feel like the brick and mortar, where you can't really do that. I mean, I guess Nike probably would let you on the site, but
Right.
it's more likely that you're more in the inner circle, right? When you're kind of investing in
Right.
as an LP.
You're an owner. I mean, you have certain rights as an owner. You have expectations that you're able to be there and be a part of this too.
Oh yeah, 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 for
Yeah.
sure.
What would you say is the hardest part so far? You talked a little bit about vetting potential sponsors. So, I mean, is that the hardest part of passively investing?
No, I think so like back then, especially now that I'm sponsoring like my own deals, I think probably the hardest part I would say is the control, right? So
Yeah.
when you're passive, so like when you're a sponsor, you're doing everything. Like I'm talking with the lender, the PM company, the contractors. I'm like you're like the linchpin and
Yeah.
like everything, right? Well, when you're passive, once you're comfortable with the deal and you've forwarded your money, to like their bank account or whatever, you're pretty much done. I mean,
Yeah.
you don't have to do anything. I recommend that you make the phone calls and talk to like the sponsor and the team and go through all the reports, but you don't really have to do anything.
Right.
Um, so I think for me, it was like the control. So if I didn't have time and I had like a large nest egg, I would definitely, probably just be passive all the time, just
Yeah.
because just by the sheer easiness of it.
Yeah. I think most people I talk to that are on the sponsor side eventually want to get to a point where they can just be passive and invest
Yeah.
in other people's deals. That's the dream, right? So, I
Yeah.
mean, but like you said, that takes a significant amount of um, tolerance for giving up a little bit of power. Limited partners are just that, they're limited. And for some people, that doesn't fit their investing style. They want to be hands-on, they want to get their hands dirty, more so than what you can do as an LP. Like you said, you wanted to learn that. So you were on calls, you were looking at reports, you were asking a lot of questions. So you were a little different than most passive investors, but most people just want to put their money in, look at the reports every once in a while and be done with it and not think about it, cash their checks.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, yeah, for sure. And that's one thing is, probably as an LP, you want to make sure, that you do, that you do understand this, is how does this work? Like what are the moving pieces that affect a deal? How do you analyze a deal, at least at
Right.
a high level, right? That way, whenever a sponsor comes to you and says, hey, we're going to do this at the property, you can go through all the documents and say, well, typically, you don't do 10% increase in revenue on the first year. Why did you do
Right.
it? And they might have a good reason why, but
Mm-hmm.
at least if you understand, how things work at a high level, know some good rules of thumb or
Yeah.
whatever, you're probably more likely to be able to give up like that control, right? Because you'll
Right.
say, okay, well, yeah, this makes sense. The team makes sense, the market makes sense, and this deal overall makes sense.
Yeah.
I like it. You know.
Yeah. A lot of that fear and fear in general comes from a lack of knowledge, a lack of education, not knowing what you don't know. And so the more you educate yourself, the more you look at some of these things, I think, at least in my experience, I found that that fear dissipates the more research I do or the more information I look into. And so
Mhm.
that's a lot for a passive investor to take on. But if you trust the people you work with, then it makes it a little bit easier. So how did you know that you were working with the right people? How did you vet that sponsor?
Well, I didn't just jump on ship with them, like right away.
Right.
I took the time. Um, I took the time that to kind of research them, like Google them, go to like different meetings, talk to the people in their network, out of their network. I went to all kinds
Yeah.
of different local meetups, local groups that they were in. I talked to them a lot too, to make sure that I knew that they had the experience and the track record. One of our so in my mastermind, I think multifamily, he's got a list of like 22 questions, to ask a passive or
Yeah.
to ask a sponsor. So I made sure I went through and kind of documented, like what questions are pertinent to him, or whatever.
Yeah.
And like for instance, like one of them was, are you investing in this deal? And
Yeah.
if the answer is no, then like why? I mean,
You better
they
have a good reason.
yeah, for sure. But definitely just talk to everyone like who's in and out of like their network to see about like their credibility, their track record, if they failed or not, all
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, that's important. So, are there any resources that helped you get to that point of not investing to investing? Podcasts, books, blogs, anything that helped you educate yourself a little more on what you were doing?
Yeah. Well, initially I was mentored by Mark Kinney of
Hmm.
Multifamily. So back before he had a mastermind inner circle, it was just he and I kind of developing all that content, and so I was kind of like his guinea pig, so pretty much everything that he has now, like we help kind of grow. Now it's evolved way beyond that, since we first initially started and all that. But so I was initially kind of mentored by Think Multifamily.
Yeah.
But I also listened to, tons and tons of podcasts, like you got Old Capital, you
Yeah.
got Old Dogs, like they have some like no fluff content in their bigger pockets. Like they have tons of education. I would, with them, I'll be careful to make sure that you can find a niche and stick with it, because like there's so much content on
Yeah.
that site. So there's
Man, that's
that.
the truth.
Yeah. Um, I always go to like local groups, like local meetups,
Yeah.
seminars. Try to find different seminars that people are going to, like even nationwide. If you can attend like one or two different ones all over the country. Like once again, TMF, they have another one coming up, the
Yep.
Fire Summit. It's like next month. So try to go to like there where people who are like-minded doing what you want to do are there that you can meet and talk to and kind of like connect with.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
Well, and one of the questions that I get pretty regularly is how do you find a good sponsor? How do you find someone that you can feel comfortable trusting your money with? And it starts with a relationship, and you meet those people, you start that relationship at events just like that. One of the biggest ways to find them is to go to Bigger Pockets and talk about syndication, say, hey, I want to be a passive investor, or actually go to these events. Like the Fire Summit that's coming up with Think Multifamily. There's going to be a lot of sponsors there that are going to be quality people that are already exposed to the questions that you were going to talk about. So I think that's a great advice to go to those conferences.
Yeah, and then go meet them and try to get a few people who've invested with them, and then ask ask those passives, or
Yeah.
like those LPs, ask them like, hey, are they good at like communicating? Are they open? Are they transparent? Did
Yep.
they make a return on this last investment? If the answer is yeah, then then that's a good way forward at least.
Yeah. Yeah. So overall, positive experience, passively investing. Would you recommend it to someone, or would you say to go more active? Someone in your position ask for advice. What would you say to them?
I would say, it depends on your goals, right?
Mhm.
Definitely, like I said, it's a great way to learn. It's a great way to start to kind of get in there, and kind of build, kind of learn the team, meet the people on the team. It's a good way to learn how everything's kind of fit together. What kind of reports like they put out, how things are,
Yeah.
done. So it's a great way to do it. If you don't have time, but you still want mailbox money, absolutely.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with, like you said, and that's a lot of people's goal, like their end state is to do kind of like what we do, right? Like go out there and work our butts off and then
Yeah.
turn around and take our money and then passively invest in other deals.
Yeah.
So, um, yeah, I would recommend it. I've had a lot of positive results with it.
What would you just say to someone who might be on the fence? They're trying to figure out if investing in passive real estate syndications is right for them. Um, it, on the fence, what would you say to them?
Well, if you're on the fence, probably it's because it's a lack of information, like you said, Luke, right? So, you know, definitely learn, start educating yourself that way you can be more confident in your
Yeah.
decisions, right? So start learning how deals work, start analyzing deals. And if you don't know how to do it, like find someone who does, or there's tons of content out there. Learn how to analyze a deal at least at a high level. That way you can kind of apply rules of thumb, see how income, expenses, NOI, cap rate and all that works.
Yeah.
And then you start kind of forming like a middle picture, um, and then kind of find ways that you can vet the team, the
Yep.
market, and the deal. Because really, like once you kind of understand the deal, like that's kind of like the very last thing. But once you know how to vet, the sponsor and the market itself, then you're like, okay, well the deal makes sense. They're doing this X, Y, Z. Yeah, this is great. You have a good track record. I like it. Let's go ahead and move forward with it. So,
Awesome.
um, and if you do have a large nest egg, probably don't pour it all into one investment. Even as a sponsor, I would love it if you had
Yeah.
200K. And you're like, well, I'm gonna do all 200K. I'd be like, well, I love that, but let's try to spread it out
That would
over
be great,
a
but
couple of
I
deals.
completely agree.
Yeah,
Because
yeah,
I mean, you and I are joking, but it is a distinct possibility that you could lose some money, and we don't want to see that relationship burned. I mean, the the fact is, there's no way to predict all the different economic variables that could come into play on any one deal. And just because you know someone that had a bad deal doesn't mean that all deals are bad. Doesn't, and just because you have someone that had a really good deal, same thing applies. It doesn't necessarily mean that all deals are going to be good. It's important to vet your sponsors, just like you were saying.
oh yeah, 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 for sure.
Yeah.
Just overall, just if they're on the fence, probably like their first step is education. You
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, I agree. Well, this has been awesome. If people want to get in touch with you or get in contact with you, what's your company? If you want to provide contact details, tell us what you're up to.
Oh yeah, sure. My company is Evo Squared Enterprises, and my email address is evo2 enterprises at gmail.com.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thanks for taking the time and coming on and answering some of the questions that might help people.
Absolutely, man. Thanks for having me on.
All
It's
right.
been great.
Thanks.